The sun bled orange and bruised purple over Portland, drowning the Willamette River in shadow. On the Hawthorne Bridge, Sloane Whitaker, 29 years old and fueled by defiant curiosity, was trapped. Traffic was a parking lot, the evening air thick with the smell of exhaust and the faint, fishy tang of the river below. She had her windows down, the stereo thumping a lo-fi beat that she tapped out on the steering wheel. As an independent, investigative podcaster, Sloane lived for the stories nobody else would touch, and her internal clock was already ticking toward a deadline. A shadow detached itself from the gridlock, a motorcycle, sleek and black as polished obsidian, filtered through the stalled cars. It was a Triumph Street twin, classic and powerful, and it stopped precisely parallel to her driver's side door. The rider was tall, encased in black leather that looked more like armor than apparel. He wore a three-quarters helmet, and behind the dark sunglasses, Sloane could just make out a pair of intensely cold, gray eyes. They were fixed on her. Sloane wasn't the type to be intimidated. She leaned over, her blonde hair falling over her shoulder, and offered a wry smile. The music gave her courage. "Nice bike. Biker boy," she called out, her voice playful over the thrum of his engine. The rider didn't move for a second. Then, slowly, his head tilted. He lifted his sunglasses just enough to rest them on the bridge of his nose, giving her an unobstructed view of those startling eyes. A smirk pulled at one side of his mouth. "You picked the wrong guy to flirt with," he said. His voice was a revelation. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the traffic noise, a low, gravelly rumble like cedar smoke and aged whiskey. Before Sloane could formulate a reply, the light ahead turned green. The cars in front of her began to creep forward. She expected the biker to rocket away, to vanish into the flow. He did not. He sat there, engine idling, and let the first wave of cars pass him, his gaze still locked on her. It was a power move, pure and simple, a challenge. Sloane, feeling a strange mix of annoyance and intrigue, lifted her phone, half hidden by her door frame. She hit record, capturing a few seconds of the mystery biker as he finally, deliberately, pulled his sunglasses down and accelerated smoothly into the downtown sprawl. She saved the clip, labeling it Arrogant Biker. Shaking off the weird encounter, she navigated the side streets to Shoreline Photo. It was an old-school print lab that, for the right price, would digitize sensitive materials for clients who mistrusted the cloud. Her contact, a nervous film student, had left the package for her under a false name. The manila envelope waiting at the counter had no recipient listed, just 3 words scrawled in block letters: Marrow Ledger Kestrel Yard. Sloane tucked the envelope into her messenger bag, the stiff cardboard pressing against her hip. She pushed open the glass door to leave, the bell above tinkling, and froze, across the street, reflected in the dark window of an antique shop, was the unmistakable silhouette of the Triumph Street twin. It was parked half a block down, just far enough away not to be an obvious tale, but too close to be a coincidence. He was watching the shop. He was watching her. A cold prickle ran down her spine, silencing the music still playing in her head. She walked, purposefully not looking back, for 3 blocks before ducking into the Copper Finch. The bar was her neutral ground. Dark wood, the smell of stale beer and fried potatoes, and booths deep enough to hide a laptop screen. She slid into the back corner, ordered a porter she wouldn't taste, and pulled out her computer. She connected to the bar's unsecured network, a habit she knew was risky, and slid the contents from the manila envelope. It wasn't a ledger. It was a series of high-resolution photographs of a ledger, pages and pages of handwritten notes, dates, shipping codes, and weights. They meant nothing to her until she saw the stamp. On the corner of every 3rd page was an official-looking emblem, brutally redacted with a thick black marker. But the redaction was sloppy, peeking from beneath the ink. Sloane could just make out the words Orion Compliance Unit, a fictional agency, as far as the public knew. A bogeyman whispered about in her circles. supposedly a black ops branch of city oversight that answered to no one. This was it. This was the story. A shadow fell over her table. Sloane's head snapped up, her hand instinctively moving to close the laptop. It was him, the biker. He'd removed his helmet and glasses. Up close, he was even more imposing. His dark hair was cut short, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his smile, when it came, was not friendly. It was a slight, knowing lift of his lips that revealed a paper-thin scar bisecting his left cheekbone. This was not the face of a simple drifter. This was the calculated calm of a predator, a leader of the pack. This was Cassian Vale, though she didn't know his name yet. He slid into the booth opposite her, moving with a fluid, unsettling grace. He didn't ask. "I owe you a warning," he said, his voice just as smoky and low as it had been on the bridge, forcing her to lean in. "Don't open that envelope on public Wi-Fi." Sloane's blood ran cold. She snapped the laptop shut. "How did you—" Why, she demanded instead, her training kicking in, pushing past the fear. Cassian leaned forward, the faint scent of leather and rain clinging to him. His gray eyes were devoid of any warmth, but they held a strange, assessing intensity. "Because when you smiled at me on the bridge," he said softly, "their cameras saw it too." Cassian's hand moved, sliding across the sticky table. He pushed a tiny black object toward her, stopping it with one finger, a micro SD card. "This was missing from the set," he said. Sloane's eyes snapped from the card to his face. Her heart was a cold hammer in her chest. How could he know what was in the set? How did he get this? She moved to slam the laptop shut again, but his hand was already gone, resting casually on the table. He was not a threat. His posture said, his eyes said something else entirely. "Who are you?" Sloane demanded, her voice a low, hard whisper. She hated feeling 2 steps behind. "How do you know about Kestrel Yard? Are you following me?" "I am a man who keeps the docks at Kestrel Yard," he answered, the non-answer infuriating. He watched her, his gaze unwavering. "And you are a woman who asks questions in places she should not be. That envelope is a death sentence. That Wi-Fi signal is the signature on the warrant." Sloane ignored the warning, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. She picked up the SD card. If he wanted to stop her, he would have done it already. This was a test, or a different kind of trap. She slid the card into the laptop's adapter. A new drive mounted. It was not photos of a ledger. It was the ledger itself. Scanned pages, pristine, unredacted, and more. Spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and a single, encrypted video file. As she clicked through the scans, a faint image emerged in the background of each page, visible only when she inverted the colors. A digital watermark. It was a stylized compass rose, and beneath it a line of Tex Glacier Pier, appointment 2 a.m., Project Brimstone. The moment she read the words, the lights above their booth flickered, the music in the bar distorted with a crackle of static, then died. The bartender cursed, banging on his register. "They are tracing the device," Cassian said. He was not alarmed. He was stating a fact. He was already sliding out of the booth, his eyes on the front door, then the back. "We are moving. Now." "I am not going anywhere with you," Sloane shot back, pulling the laptop toward her. Cassian's hand closed over her forearm. It was not a violent grab. It was firm, impersonal, and utterly non-negotiable. The warmth of his skin penetrated her jacket, a sudden, shocking point of contact. "You can stay and explain yourself to Orion," he said, his voice dropping. "Or you can come with me and live to ask more questions. Your choice. You have 3 seconds. He did not wait for her answer. He pulled. Sloane, off balance and seeing the front doors of the bar swing open to reveal 2 men in dark suits, stumbled after him. He did not drag her. He moved, and she was forced to move with him, shielded by his body as he navigated the narrow space between tables. He bypassed the kitchen, shoving open a fire door she had not seen, and plunged them into a dark, narrow alley. The sudden silence was broken only by the sound of rain drumming on metal dumpsters and the distant city traffic. The air smelled of wet pavement and spoiled food. About 20 yards down the alley, a black sedan was parked, its engine idling, its interior dark, a threat. Cashin pushed her flat against the cold, wet brick wall, his body covering hers for a brief second. The Valdez network wants that ledger. They deal in poison, he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. Orion Compliance wants it too. They deal in control. Whoever has that ledger does not just own the docks. They will break this city. Sloane's mind was racing, connecting the whispers she had heard about Valdez smuggling fentanyl with the official-looking stamp of Orion. A war was happening under her feet, and she had just picked up the battle plans. She pushed against his chest, needing space, needing air. "What are you in this? Are you a cop, FBI?" He pulled back just enough for her to see his face in the gloom. The faint scar on his cheek seemed to pulse. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "Worse," he said. A sound, a soft foot, split the night. It was a noise so quiet that Sloane almost missed it, but a chip of brick exploded from the wall, precisely where her head had been a moment before, showering her hair with grit, a silent sniper. Cashin's reaction was not human. It was animal. In one fluid motion, he threw his entire body weight against hers, shoving her down behind a rusted, overflowing dumpster. The stench of garbage filled her lungs. "Stay down," he commanded. He did not run. He moved toward the danger, toward his parked Triumph, which Sloane now saw was tucked into a dark alcove just feet away. A second foot, and the sedan's driver's side window imploded. The men who had entered the bar were not coming out. Cassian was already on the bike, the engine roaring to life with a single kick. He looked back at her, his face a mask of cold fury in the flashing neon from the street. "Come on." Sloane did not hesitate. She scrambled from behind the dumpster, her laptop bag banging against her hip, and threw herself onto the seat behind him. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her hands gripping the cold, hard leather of his jacket. She could feel the plates of his back muscles tense beneath her hands. A third shot ricocheted off the bike's frame with a metallic scream. Cassian gunned the engine. The bike did not shoot forward, it spun, the rear tire smoking on the wet asphalt, turning them 180 degrees in the narrow space. The maneuver pressed her tight against him, her face buried in his back. As the bike rocketed toward the opposite end of the alley, toward the open street and the relative safety of chaos, Cassian turned his head slightly. His voice, even over the roar of the engine, was clear in her ear. "You just stepped on the line," he yelled. "If you are in, do not look back." The world dissolved into a smear of neon and rain. Cassian rocketed the Triumph out of the alley, leaning so hard into the turn that Sloane's knee almost scraped the pavement. They hit the street and plunged into the chaos of Old Town's traffic. Horns blared. A taxi swerved, its driver laying on the horn, the sound swallowed by the guttural roar of Cassian's engine. Sloane had her eyes squeezed shut, her face pressed hard against the solid wall of his back. She could smell the rain, the sharp tang of gasoline, and underneath it all, the scent of his leather jacket, damp, worn, and uniquely his. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest, its rhythm indistinct from the thumping vibration of the powerful machine beneath them. A dark sedan, the same one from the bar, materialized in their rearview mirror, its headlights cutting through the downpour like angry eyes. "They are still on us," she shouted, her voice thin against the wind. Cashin's only response was to twist the throttle. He did not speed up in a straight line. He became a part of the city's architecture. He cut a hard right, mounting the sidewalk for 10 feet to bypass a stalled bus, the bike bumping violently. He then veered into an oncoming lane of traffic, forcing a pizza delivery car to slam on its brakes before diving into a narrow gap between a streetcar and a row of parked cars. He was not just driving. He was navigating a battlefield he knew by heart. He took them into a maze of service alleys behind the Pearl District. The sedan was heavier, less nimble, but it was persistent. It skidded around the corners after them, its engine whining in protest. "Hold on." Cassian's voice was a low growl, vibrating through her hands, which were locked so tightly around his waist she thought her knuckles would crack. He suddenly braked, the rear tire locking and sliding on the wet cobblestones, and pivoted into an impossibly narrow, dark fissure between two brick buildings, an alley so tight it was little more than a service corridor. It was a Z-turn. He leaned left, then right, then left again, the handlebars just grazing the brick walls. Sloane felt the muscles in his back bunch and release, each movement precise, controlled, and powerful. He was one with the machine. In that tight space, the sedan could not follow. They heard the squeal of its brakes and the frustrated crunch of metal as its front bumper likely met a dumpster. They burst out onto a quiet industrial street near the river, the air suddenly still and heavy with the smell of the Willamette. The chase was over. Cassian did not slow down until they reached a nondescript block of warehouses under the Fremont Bridge. He guided the bike into the shadow of a loading bay, dismounted, and hit a button on a small remote. A section of a corrugated steel wall marked warehouse. 39 rumbled upward, revealing a dark interior. He rolled the bike inside, and the door slid shut behind them, plunging them into sudden, echoing silence. Sloane's legs were shaking as she slid off the bike. The adrenaline was ebbing, leaving a cold, trembling void. The space was enormous, a cavern dedicated to machines. Custom motorcycles stood in various states of repair, their chrome bones gleaming under the few work lights Cassian switched on. But in the back, past the lifts and tool chests, was a command center. A massive workbench was littered with maritime charts of the Portland harbor, shipping schedules, and a high-frequency, encrypted radio that hissed with static. "Where are we?" Sloane asked, her voice raspy. "My shop. My base." Cassian was already at the workbench, pulling off his wet jacket. He tossed it onto a chair. Underneath, he wore a simple black Henley, and she could see the defined muscles of his arms and shoulders. "The Merrow Street outfit," he said, turning to face her, his gray eyes pinning her in place. "That is my family. We keep order on the docks. Kestrel Yard is ours." He walked to a small refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, tossing it to her. Her hands fumbled, but she caught it. "You are Mafia," she said. It was not a question. "We are businessmen," he corrected, his voice flat, "with rules. No human trafficking, no poison. We do not touch children. The law is the law. Valdez and his network broke those rules. Orion wants to burn the rule book and own the ashes." Sloane's mind was spinning. This was bigger than a podcast. This was a war for the city's soul. She walked to the workbench, her decision made. She slid the manila envelope and the laptop from her bag and placed them deliberately on top of a chart of the port. "You want the ledger," she said. "I want the truth. All of it. No more half answers. You give me everything you have on Project Brimstone, Valdez, and Orion, and I help you expose them." Cassian looked at the laptop, then at her. A flicker of something respect, perhaps, passed through his cold eyes. "You have nerve. I have a deadline." Before he could answer, a monitor on the wall flickered to life. It showed a grainy, high-angle view of a familiar-looking street. It was her street, a drone feed. "You are right about Orion," Cassian said, his voice hardening as he stared at the screen. A white van with an official-looking city logo was parked outside her apartment building. 4 men, wearing windbreakers that read Orion Tactical Liaison under a fake tax audit division patch, were setting up a perimeter. They were blocking the entrance. "They knew where you lived," he said. "They were just waiting for you to confirm you had the package. You cannot go back there. They are not auditors. Sloane, they are hunters." He turned to her. "I have a place, a houseboat on Swan Island. It is off-grid, safe. You will go there. You will stay quiet, and I will handle this." Sloane bristled. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar anger. Handle me, make me stay quiet. She zipped up her jacket. I am not some package you get to hide, Cassian. I do not run from my own story. I finish it. He took a step toward her, his height and presence filling the room. This is not a story. This is a war, and you are unarmed. That ledger is the weapon, she shot back, and right now, I am the only one who knows how to use it. You want my help? It is on my terms. We go to your houseboat, together. One night, we decode that data, find out what brimstone is, and in the morning, I decide what goes live. A long, silent moment passed between them. The only sound was the hiss of the radio and the rain beginning to drum on the warehouse roof. One night, Cassian finally agreed, his jaw tight. We do this your way, but in my world, in the morning is a luxury we may not have. Swan Island was not an island but a man-made peninsula, a fortress of industry and mud. Cassian's houseboat, the Crescent 13, was moored at the end of a long, rickety dock, hidden by a line of rusting freighters. It was small, made of dark cedar, and looked more like a floating cabin than a home. The only light was a single, dim yellow bulb above the door. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm, thick with the smell of old wood, salt, and the faint, clean scent of engine oil. It was a single, open room, meticulously organized, a small galley, a tightly made bunk, and a worn chart table. The only sound, besides their damp footsteps on the wooden floor, was the constant, gentle rocking of the boat and the rhythmic lap, lap, lap of water against the hull. It was the most isolated place Sloane had ever been. Cassian locked the door, a heavy deadbolt sliding home with a metallic thud. He moved to the small kitchenette and returned with a first aid kit. You are bleeding, he stated. Sloane looked down. Her left hand, the one she'd used to brace herself against the brick wall, was scraped raw. A thin line of blood trickled from a cut on her forearm, a gift from the exploding glass in the alley. She had not even felt it. It is nothing, she said, but her voice was shaky. It will get infected, he said, his tone blunt. He gestured her to the small table. Sit. She sat, and he pulled up a stool opposite her. He opened the kit, and she was struck by the contrast. His hands were large, scarred and calloused. They were the hands of a fighter, a mechanic, a man who moved heavy things. Yet, his movements as he cleaned the cut were surprisingly, almost agonizingly, gentle. He was clumsy with the antiseptic wipe, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if he were disarming a bomb. The brief antiseptic sting made her flinch. Sorry, he muttered, his eyes on his work. You are not very good at this, she observed, her voice quiet. I am usually the one causing the injury, he replied, without a trace of humor. He wrapped a sterile gauze around her arm, his fingers brushing her skin. The touch was impersonal, yet it sent a jolt through her, a sudden, unwanted warmth that had nothing to do with the houseboat's small heater. The dark room felt a little less cold. When he was done, he taped the gauze and pulled back. Now, the ledger. They set her laptop on the chart table. The single light bulb above cast deep shadows on their faces, the screen's blue glow making them look like ghosts. They worked, their earlier animosity replaced by a tense, shared focus. Here, Sloane said, pointing to the screen, the columns marked brimstone. They all correspond to these shipping containers. She cross-referenced the numbers. They are all listed as medical supplies. Critical. But look at the weights. Cassian leaned in, his shoulder almost brushing hers. She could feel the solid presence of him, the contained power. The weight is wrong, he said, his voice a low rumble. These are listed at 2,000 pounds. A container of medical supplies, even refrigerated, should be 10 times that. They are shipping air. Or, Sloane said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the medical supplies are just the cover. A few boxes on top. The rest of the weight is something else. Something they are not logging. She went back to the scans, zooming in on the Orion Compliance Unit logo. You saw this stamp, but did you see the digital file number? She inverted the colors again. Beneath the main logo, a faint string of numbers appeared, embedded like a watermark. It is not a file number. It is an identification code. She pulled up a separate window, a database of city employees and public contracts she had spent months building. If K is a person, they would have an internal ID. She typed in the string. A single file popped up, a restricted access personnel file, locked, but the public-facing title was visible. Administrator K, Drews, Interagency Logistics Coordinator. Administrator K. Sloan whispered, "They are not just a rogue cop. They are in the city's mainframe." "Kellen Drews," Cassian said, his voice flat and cold. "He oversees all private contracts for the port. He decides who gets to bid. He decides who gets audited." "He is the one who controls Orion," Sloan concluded. "He has been using a public-facing unit as his own private armed cleanup crew, and he is in business with Valdez." "No," Cassian corrected. "He's using Valdez, and Valdez is too stupid to see it." Sloan leaned back, the full, crushing weight of the conspiracy settling on her. This was not a story about a few bad actors. This was the system itself, rotted from the inside. Why, Sloan asked, her voice raw. Why are you doing this? You are Marrow Street. You are not the law. Why risk this for a few shipping containers? Cassian was silent for a long time, staring at the screen but seeing something else. The lapping of the water seemed to grow louder. "My brother," Sloan said, the words tumbling out, pulled from a place of cold, hard grief. "My younger brother, Evan. He thought he was taking a prescription painkiller for his back. It was from the docks. It was full of fentanyl. It was a Valdez shipment. She met his gaze, her own burning. He died. On his apartment floor, alone. So do not talk to me about rules or business. I want the man who signed that death warrant. I do not care about being famous, Cassian. I just want to be right." Cassian's face, which had been a mask of stone, softened almost imperceptibly. He looked away from her, out the small porthole window into the black, rain-slicked night. "You are right," he said. "I am not the law. My family has one rule, the one I told you. No poison. Valdez brought that poison to our docks. He did it under the protection of Drews." He turned back, his gray eyes locking with hers, and for the first time, she saw the rage simmering beneath the ice. "I cut his supply lines. I sank 2 of his shipments. That is why Kay wants me off the board. That is why he sent Orion. This is not business. This is pest control." A sudden, bright light swept across the cabin, illuminating their faces in a harsh white glare. Cassian moved instantly. His hand slammed the laptop shut, plunging them into darkness. Another hand grabbed hers, pulling her from the chair and down to the floor, behind the relative cover of the chart table. "What is it?" Sloan whispered, her heart leaping into her throat. "Shut up," he commanded. His voice was not a whisper. It was a thread of steel. Through the cracks in the window blinds, she saw the beam of a powerful searchlight. It was coming from the water. A low, throbbing engine sound, a motorboat, idled just yards from their hull. It was not a police boat. Cassian had switched off the main power. The houseboat was dark, dead on the water. He still held her hand, his grip a painful, grounding pressure. He put his lips to her ear, his breath a hot shock in the cold. "They are checking the moorings," he whispered. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. Breathe with me. Slow." He took a long, silent breath, and she forced her own lungs to match his rhythm. In, out. The silence in the cabin was absolute, thick as velvet, broken only by the lapping water and the thrum of the boat outside. The searchlight played across the walls, a restless, probing eye. It felt like an eternity. Then, with a sudden rev of its engine, the boat moved on. The light swept away. The thrumming faded. They stayed there, in the dark, for a full minute more. Cassian did not let go of her hand. Sloan could feel the pulse in his wrist, steady and strong against her own frantic heartbeat. Finally, slowly, he released his grip. His hand slid from hers, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than was necessary. He rose, a dark silhouette against the window, and watched the boat's lights disappear toward the bridge. The tension remained, a new, different tension hanging in the air between them. The unasked questions, the shared confessions, the brush with death. It was all there, in the small, dark cabin, with the water lapping at the hull. Cassian flicked the power back on, but the boat's small generator was the only light he allowed. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with their shared secrets and the lingering threat from the water. "They are hunting," Cassian said, his voice flat. He was no longer looking at Sloane. He was looking at the laptop, his mind miles away. Calculating. They know the ledger is in play. They do not know who has it, or they would have hit this boat with a full team. That was a scout, a probe. "Glacier Pier," Sloane said, her voice hard. "Project Brimstone? The appointment is for 2 a.m. "A meeting," Cassian said, nodding. "Valdez and Drews, the exchange, the poison for the port access." "So we give it to them," Sloane said. Cassian turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Not the real ledger," she clarified, her mind clicking into high gear, the fear replaced by the familiar buzz of a plan forming, a fake one. "We make a copy of the encrypted video file, the most damning part, but we corrupt the rest. We make 2 copies. We give one to Valdez, one to Orion. We make them think the other side betrayed them." "You want to set a match to a powder keg?" "I want to get them both in the same room," Sloane countered. "Glacier Pier, 2 a.m. They both show up to intercept the ledger, but instead, they find each other. I get it all on tape. The whole rotten system collapses." A slow, dangerous smile touched Cassian's lips. "You are not just a podcaster. You are an arsonist." He paced the small cabin, a caged wolf. "It is a good plan, but they will not just show up. They have to be invited." "That is my part." Sloane opened her laptop again, navigating to her podcasting software. "I have a live episode scheduled for tonight. My listeners, they like games. I will embed the coordinates for Glacier Pier as an audio Easter egg, a high-frequency tone. I will bill it as an ARG, an alternate reality game. Find the secret drop. It will create enough digital noise to mask our real intention, and it will give us plausible deniability." "And it brings civilians into the line of fire," Cassian countered, his voice sharp. "No, I will set the drop for 1:45 a.m. The real meet is at 2. My listeners will get there, find nothing, and be gone before Valdez or Orion even show up. But their digital check-ins will create a perfect, confusing alibi for why we were all looking at Glacier Pier." Cassian stared at her, the assessment in his eyes so intense it was almost a physical touch. "You are more like me than you know." He grabbed a burner phone from a drawer and punched in a number. "May, I need you. Warehouse 39. Bring the kit." He paused. "And Jax, I need his hands. No questions, just speed." He hung up. "My team. May Torv. She used to design locks for a living. Now she just opens them. Jax Otero is the best driver in the city. Moves a 2-ton truck like it is a bicycle." He looked at Sloane. "A small crew. We trust by unwritten laws." As if summoned by his words, Sloane's personal phone, which she had set to silent, lit up on the table. A text from an unknown, encrypted number. One line, "Stop, Whitaker. Your biker is a killer." Attached was a video file. Sloane's hand trembled as she tapped it. The video was short, maybe 10 seconds, grainy, dark, clearly filmed from a distance. It was a loading dock. It was Cassian. He had a man pinned against a container. The man was screaming. Cassian said something Sloane could not hear, and then there was a sickening, wet snap. Cassian broke the man's arm. A deliberate, brutal act. The video cut. Sloane went cold. She looked up at Cassian, who had not moved. He was watching her, his face granite. "He was using children as shields," Cassian said, his voice quiet, but lethal. "At North Greeley, he was running a trafficking ring, moving kids inside produce trucks. The man in the video, he had a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with a knife to her throat, demanding passage." Sloane felt the air leave her lungs. "My family has one rule, the one I told you. Cashin continued, his eyes burning into hers. We do not touch children, but I broke another one that day. I let him see me coming. I let him grab the girl. He looked down at his own hands, clenching them. I got the girl away, and then I made sure he could never hold a knife or a child again. I broke my own rule. I did not let them be used. Not one more time. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not explaining. He was confessing. He was giving her the truth she had demanded in all its ugliness. Sloane stared at the phone, at the dark image of his violence. Then she looked at his face, the scar on his cheek, the cold gray eyes that had seen too much. She thought of her brother, Evan, dead on his apartment floor. She thought of the poison and the men who sold it. Slowly, deliberately, she deleted the text message and the video. She slid the phone back into her pocket. She took a deep breath. Good, Sloane said, her voice steady. Now they are both marked. Cassian nodded. The silent contract sealed. He returned to the chart table. All business. The plan is good, but we need insurance, he said. When they get to the pier, they will look for the shipment, the medical container. Container 606, Sloane said, reading from the ledger. May can rig it. A welcome present. He grabbed a marker and drew on the chart. She will fit a chemical atomizer to the door's locking mechanism. The moment that container is unsealed, it sprays an aerosol, odorless, colorless, invisible. A trap, Sloane said. A tag, Cashin corrected. It is a compound that is inert in normal light, but it glows neon green under a specific UV frequency. Whoever opens that container, whether it is Valdez's man or one of Drew's Orion agents, will be painted. We will know exactly who took the bait. He capped the marker and looked at her, the last traces of his confession gone, replaced by the cold focus of the predator. Get your podcast ready, Sloane, but understand this. When we go to that pier, we are walking between two different kinds of monsters. Valdez will shoot first and ask questions later. Orion, he added, his voice grim. Orion will cuff you first and then plant the evidence to make sure you are the one who gets blamed. There is no clean way out of this. I stopped looking for clean a long time ago, Sloane said. I just want the truth to see the light. Then let us go hunting in the dark. The plan was set. The fake ledgers were on a secure drive. Sloane had broadcast her live show, a masterwork of coded language. She had buried the coordinates to Glacier Pier inside a complex, high-frequency audio puzzle, launching her ARG with a promise of a secret reveal at 1:45 a.m. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. The engines of the houseboat were off. Cassian had cut all power except for one small, battery-operated lamp that cast their small cabin in deep, golden shadows. Outside, the light drizzle had thickened into a steady, rhythmic rain, drumming on the fiberglass roof. It was 11:30 p.m., 2 hours and 15 minutes until Sloane's listeners would create their digital diversion, 2.5 hours until the real meet. The adrenaline that had hummed in Sloane's veins for the past 6 hours had finally ebbed, leaving a deep, bone-aching chill in its wake. She sat on the edge of the bunk, rubbing her hands together, her gaze lost in the darkness beyond the porthole. She was cold, but she was also vibrating with a raw, nervous energy. Cassian was at the chart table, cleaning a piece of equipment, his movements economical and precise. He had been silent for almost an hour, but he was watching her. She could feel his gaze. He stood up. The movement was so fluid, she barely registered it until he was in front of her. He did not speak. He simply shrugged off his own leather jacket, the one he had worn on the bike, the one that still carried the faint scent of the Chase gasoline, rain, and him. He draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was heavy, a comforting, protective weight, but it was the heat inside it that made her gasp. It was full of his residual body warmth. It was like being wrapped in an embrace. It sank into her skin, chasing away the cold, but replacing it with a different kind of shiver. The small distance between them evaporated into no distance. He was standing. She was sitting, but his knees were almost touching hers. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. His gray eyes, usually so cold and assessing, were dark and fixed on her mouth. The air in the cabin, already thick with unspoken things, became a live wire, a string pulled so taut it hummed. "You are not an assignment," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur that was swallowed by the rain. Sloane's breath hitched. Her heart, which had been a nervous drum, gave a single, painful thud. "And you," she whispered, her fingers curling into the warm leather on her shoulders, "are not just a biker." It was all it took. The admission, the shared acknowledgement, the string snapped. He did not lean in. It was a mutual fall. One moment they were suspended in the tension, the next their mouths met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was explosive, a detonation of all the adrenaline and fear and raw, shared confessions of the night. It was the crash of the alley wall, the roar of the Triumph's engine, the desperate, silent breath-holding in the dark. His lips were firm, demanding, and she met his pressure instantly, her own need rising to match his. Then, just as quickly as it had ignited, the kiss changed. It deepened, slowed, shifted from a collision to a conversation. His rough, calloused hand came up, not to her face, but to the back of her neck, his fingers threading into her hair. It was not a gesture of possession, but of grounding. He held her as if she were the only real thing in the room. Sloane's hands, which had been gripping his jacket, slid up his chest, feeling the hard, steady muscle beneath his shirt. She pulled him closer, her body arching toward his. The small space of the houseboat meant there was nowhere to go, no retreat. They were a tangle of shared breath, the scent of mint on his, the rain, the cedar wood of the cabin. She whispered his name, Cassian, and the sound was not a word, but a punctuation, a moment of surrender. It was a flood of sensation, all of it safe, all of it intensely felt. The shiver that ran down her spine had nothing to do with the cold, the rough scrape of his day-old stubble against her skin, the way his heart beat, which she could now feel against her chest, was a heavy, rapid counterpoint to her own. His other hand settled on the small of her back, a solid, warm, and deeply respectful pressure, holding her steady. He made a sound, a low groan in his chest, a sound that was not a word but held all the meaning. He was the one who broke it. He pulled back, but only an inch. His breath was ragged, his forehead coming to rest against hers. His eyes were closed. He was fighting for the same control that he used to ride his bike, to run his crew. "When this is over," he breathed, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "When this is done, I want no more secrets, nothing hidden, not from you." It was the ultimate confession. He was not offering her a night. He was offering her the truth, the one thing she valued above all else. Sloane did not answer with words. She raised her head from his. She looked at his face, the scar on his cheek, the closed eyes, the vulnerability he was only just letting her see. Slowly, deliberately, she put her hands on his face, her thumbs tracing the hard line of his jaw. He opened his eyes. She kissed him. This kiss was different. It was slow, it was deliberate, it was her answer. It was a promise of the storm to come, and the calm that would follow. She pulled back, her lips just brushing his. "Then let us finish it," she whispered. 2:00 in the morning, Glacier Pier was a skeleton's hand reaching into the black water, swallowed by a fog so thick it muffled the world. The air was dead, tasting of salt, rust, and the damp chill of the river. The high-powered, sickly yellow sodium lights did not penetrate the mist. They just made it glow, creating pockets of hazy, unnatural daylight in a sea of black. And there it was, container 606, sitting alone at the end of the pier, just as the ledger had promised, looking like a great, sleeping beast. "They are here," Sloane whispered, her voice barely a breath. She was tucked behind a stack of empty crab pots with Cassian, the two of them shadows within shadows. She was right. The digital treasure hunters from her podcast, a handful of night owl urban explorers, were already on the pier. They had followed her audio map. Their phone flashlights cutting weak cones in the fog, they milled about, confused, laughing nervously. Filming their ARG adventure, they were the perfect smokescreen. No one would notice another two people with cameras. "May, Jax, in position," Cassian murmured into a small radio. Across the yard, a shadow detached itself from a parked forklift. May Torv, small and quick as a spider, moved to the container. She did not pick the lock. The prompt said it was sealed. She worked on the heavy customs seal, her tools clicking softly, neutralizing its internal tracker. Jax Otero, a large, silent man, was a ghost by the main gate, a heavy-duty truck his only companion, its engine cold. Sloane powered on her equipment, a professional audio recorder with a high-gain microphone and a small, handheld digital camera. She hit record on the audio, her voice a low, journalistic monotone. Episode 9. The Talking Rain. The time is 1:58 a.m. I am at an industrial pier. The fog is so thick I can barely see my hands. But I am not here for the weather. I am here for a ghost, a project that does not exist. Movement. Cassian's voice was a low vibration beside her. North, 2 vehicles. No lights. 2 black SUVs rolled onto the pier, their tires silent on the wet pavement. They stopped 20 yards from the container. 4 men got out, led by a man Sloane recognized from her research, Hector Valdez. He was small, neat, and looked more like an accountant than a drug lord. "Where is it?" Valdez's voice was thin and reedy. "Where is the drop? This is a circus." He gestured angrily at the confused podcasters, who were now wisely and quickly backing away. Sloane was filming, her hand steady. "Now," Cassian whispered. As if summoned, a third vehicle, a white utility van, slammed onto the pier from the opposite direction. It stopped hard, its doors sliding open before it was even stationary. Blinding white LED spotlights mounted on its roof flared to life, vaporizing the fog, turning the entire scene into a stark, overexposed stage. Orion compliance, hands in the air, now. 6 figures in tactical gear, Orion stenciled in white on their chests, fanned out, their movements practiced and military. But they held no guns, only heavy-duty zip ties and batons. Their orders were a confusing, overlapping cacophony of shouted commands, disorienting everyone. Valdez's men, caught between the container and the lights, went for their weapons. "May, the gift," Cassian spoke into his radio. From her hiding spot, May triggered the device. There was a soft hiss from the container's locking bar, a sound no one heard in the chaos. The chemical trap was set. Valdez, realizing he was outgunned, shouted at his men, "Get the package! Get the drive!" One of his men, a large brute in a heavy coat, lunged for the container, breaking the seal May had prepared. The moment the steel bar was pulled, the atomizer inside sprayed his hands and face with the invisible chemical. "We have him," Sloane whispered, switching her handheld camera to its UV filter setting through the small screen. The man's face and hands lit up as if he were covered in neon green paint. She filmed him as he fumbled with the door. The Orion team leader, a man with a mirrored face shield, ignored Valdez and pointed directly at Sloane. "You?" "The woman with the camera. Secure her. She is the one." 2 Orion agents broke off and charged her position. Cassian moved. He was not a man anymore. He was a force of nature. He stepped from the shadows. Not a weapon in his hand. The first agent raised his baton. Cassian did not block it. He moved inside the swing, his hand grabbing the man's wrist, his other hand striking the nerve cluster at the elbow. The agent's arm went limp. Cassian used the man's own momentum to spin him, dislocating his shoulder with a single, brutal twist and shoving him hard into the second agent. Both men went down in a heap. It was fast, efficient, and horrifyingly quiet. Gun! Sloan screamed. Valdez, seeing his man get inside the container, had pulled his own pistol. He was not aiming at Orion. He was aiming at Cassian. A single shot cracked the night, deafeningly loud. Cassian grabbed Sloan, pulling her behind a solid oak pallet stacked with engine parts. The bullets sparked off the metal casing where they had been standing. "Get her out!" Cassian yelled into his radio. "May, now!" The world went white. May's sonic mine was not an explosion. It was an auditory assault. A high-frequency, ear-splitting shriek erupted from the forklift, a sound that bypassed the ears and punched directly into the skull. Everyone, Valdez's men, Orion's team, even Cassian, clapped their hands to their heads, momentarily blinded and deafened by the pain. "Move!" Cassian grabbed Sloan's arm and pulled her into the disorienting fog. They ran, guided by the sound of Jax's truck engine roaring to life. As they scrambled into the back of the truck, Sloan looked back, her camera still recording. The chaos was absolute, but she saw one thing clearly. The Orion team leader, the one with the face shield, had recovered. He was not engaging Valdez. He was standing near the white van, speaking frantically into a headpiece, and he had raised his shield. It was Kellen Drews, Administrator K. He was not a city official in a high-rise. He was here, on the ground, wearing Orion black. He had been playing them all. He'd been present for the entire transaction, pulling the strings of both the puppets he had set against each other. And her camera, now, had his face. Jax drove the truck with a heavy foot, not speaking, his eyes fixed on the road. They used the service roads, arriving back at Warehouse 39 just as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky. The air was cold, the rain reduced to a fine mist. "We are not safe here," Cassian said, his voice low as he jumped from the back of the truck, pulling Sloan with him. "We grabbed the gear. We moved to the river." "What about Jax?" May asked, her eyes narrow, watching the driver. Jax Otero sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his head bowed. He was not getting out. "I am sorry, boss," Jax whispered, his voice cracking. "They have my sister. They have Maya." The blood drained from Cassian's face. "What did you do?" "Jax." The warehouse doors at the far end of the bay did not roll up. They were blown inward. 3 heavy-duty black vans screeched to a halt inside the warehouse, their headlights blinding. Men poured out, not the Orion tactical team from the pier, but a different, more professional-looking group. Their vests were emblazoned with a new logo, Orion Internal Affairs. "They put a tracker on the truck," May hissed, already pulling a small, loaded pistol from her boot. Cassian put his hand on her arm, pushing the weapon down. "No." He looked at Jax, his expression not angry, but filled with a profound, cold sorrow. "These are not his men," Cassian said to May. "He made a deal with Drews to get his sister back. They are here for me. And for her." He nodded at Sloan. "Cassian, they will kill you." Sloan grabbed his arm. "They will not shoot," Cassian said, his voice a command. He looked at Jax. "They will not shoot, will they? They are internal affairs. They are here to make an arrest, not a massacre. Drews needs us alive." "Boss, Jax was openly weeping now, a big man broken. "It is done." Cassian cut him off. He turned to Sloan and May, shoving them toward the back of the shop, toward a metal grate in the floor. "The river access. It is a 300-yard walk to the water. Go, now." "We are not leaving you," Sloan cried. "Yes. You are." Cassian's voice was a whip crack. He grabbed her shoulders, his gray eyes burning into hers. "You have the recording. You have the UV evidence on your camera. You are the only one who can burn him. I am just a mafia boss. You are the truth. Now go, before I have to shoot one of my own men." He was lying, but the threat was real. He would not shoot Jax, or any of the men Jax had inadvertently led here. He would let himself be taken. It was a tactical surrender. "Cassian," she screamed his name, a raw, desperate sound. He pushed her hard toward the tunnel. "Go, Sloan." May grabbed Sloan's arm and dragged her into the darkness. The last thing Sloan saw was Cassian Vale, the man she had kissed on the houseboat. The mafia boss who kept the docks clean, turning around, his hands raised, walking calmly toward the blinding lights and the armed men. He did not look back. Cassian was thrown into the back of a windowless transport van. The doors slammed, plunging him into darkness. He sat on the hard metal bench, the zip ties cutting into his wrists. He was calm. He was calculating. He had bought them an hour, maybe 2. The van stopped, then started again. A moment later, the interior lights flickered on. A figure was sitting on the bench opposite him, Kellen Drews. He had swapped his tactical gear for an impeccably tailored suit, but his eyes were the same cold, bureaucratic, and reptilian. "Cassian Vale," Drews said, as if they were meeting at a city council luncheon, "the thorn in my side, the king of Kestrel Yard. You know, your problem is your business model." Cassian said nothing. "You keep the docks too clean," Drews continued, smoothing a crease in his pants. "It is unnatural. This city, Cassian, it likes dirty water. It thrives on it. It gives men like me a purpose. We get to be the filter. You just clog the filter. Get to the point, Kellen." Drews smiled. "I like that. Direct." He leaned forward. "I have Valdez in custody, which is inconvenient. I have you, which is excellent. But I am missing the main actress, the podcaster. And I am missing the original ledger, the hard copy scans, not the corrupted files you and your pet journalist were so clever to plant." He tapped his fingers on his knee. "Here is the bargain. You tell me where she is. You get her to give me that drive. In return, I grant you a full pardon. Your Marrow Street outfit is audited and found to be compliant. You get to keep your dirty kingdom. I just need you to stop playing janitor." Cassian looked at Drews, a long, slow assessment. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he had given Sloane on the bridge, the one that held no humor, only cold, hard power. "You do not have the authority to grant anyone a pardon," Cassian said, his voice a low, gravelly insult. "You are just the help." Drews's face went rigid, the mask of civility gone. He stood up, his hand striking Cassian across the face. "We will see," he hissed, and banged on the door for the van to move. At 6 a.m., the sky was the color of a fresh bruise. Sloane and May huddled in the back of the Portland fish market, the stench of bleach and fish guts thick in their lungs. They were soaked, shivering, having waded through the chest-high water of the river tunnel. May had hot-wired a delivery truck to get them this far. Sloane was broken. Her camera was safe in a waterproof bag, but she was watching the recording of Cassian raising his hands over and over in her mind. "He is gone," she whispered, her voice dead. "He's not dead," May said, her voice rough. She was picking at her nails with a small knife. "Cassian does not die. He calculates. He bought us time. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" As if in answer, Sloane's phone buzzed. She had put the burner Cassian gave her in the waterproof bag. It was an encrypted, unknown number, a call. She answered, "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical. "You want to save your biker," it buzzed. "Drews thinks he has won. He's hosting his own victory party, the Arclight Gala, tonight at the Glass Museum, 8 p.m. It is his big fundraiser for the Safer Portland Initiative. He is the guest of honor." The line clicked dead. Sloane stared at the phone. The gala. A room full of the city's elite. Businessmen, politicians. A room full of cameras and media. "Drews is the guest of honor," Sloane said. "A dangerous, cold fire replacing the grief." May looked at her, a slow smile spreading. "That is a room you cannot get into." "Sloane." "I can," Sloane said, standing up, her exhaustion vanishing. She held up her camera. "He's not the guest of honor, he's the story." She pulled the UV light from her bag. "And I am going to make him the headline. May, I need a dress, and I need you to find out who was at that pier. I marked one of Valdez's men, but I need to know who Drews was talking to." She was not running. She was going to walk straight into the lion's den and set it on fire. Live on air. The Arclight Gala was a cathedral of glass, a modern museum whose walls were transparent, overlooking the glittering, rain-slicked lights of Portland. Inside, the city's elite, its politicians, its real estate moguls, and its self-proclaimed justice donors drifted in a cloud of expensive perfume and murmured self-congratulation. Sloane Whitaker moved among them like a ghost, a shark in borrowed silks. May had worked miracles. The dress was a midnight blue, elegant and understated, but with enough structure to hide the flat-pack microphone and audio transmitter pressed against her ribs. Her press credentials, forged by May, were flawless. Naming her as a lifestyle blogger for a defunct magazine, she was invisible, and she was the most dangerous person in the room. At the front of the grand hall, Kellen Drews was on a brightly lit stage, his tailored suit impeccable, his face a mask of civic duty. He was a master, his voice resonating with false sincerity. And that is why our Safer Portland initiative, funded by generous patriots like Mr. Thorne, is not just about enforcement, Drews said, gesturing to a stern-looking man in the front row. It is about cleansing. It is about taking back our streets, our docks, our future, from the poison that men like Hector Valdez peddle. The crowd applauded. Sloane felt sick. She kept moving, her small, clutch-sized purse in her hand. Inside was her phone, a portable battery, and a keychain-sized, high-intensity UV light. May had been busy. The man who had opened the container, Valdez's brute, had been arrested at the pier. But the UV trace was also on the outside handle, where a second person had touched it, May's facial recognition software, cross-referenced with the gala's guest list, had found a match, Mr. Thorne, the generous patriot. Sloane drifted closer to the front row, pretending to admire the architecture. As Drews's speech reached its crescendo, she accidentally dropped her clutch at Thorne's feet. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she murmured, bending to retrieve it. As she did, she fumbled with the clasp, her thumb hitting the switch for the UV light inside the open bag. For a fraction of a second, the targeted beam hit the back of Thorne's hand, which was resting on his knee. It glowed, a sickening, brilliant green, just like the camera feed. Thorne, the man funding the drug-free city, had been on the pier, personally inspecting the container. Sloane stood up, her heart a cold, hard stone. She had her target. She moved to a small, secondary podium set up for guest interviews, a quiet alcove away from the main stage. The tech was live. She put her phone on the lectern, hit record, and started her own live feed. "This is a special broadcast," she said, her voice low, urgent, and amplified just enough to carry over the room's polite din. "I am live from the ArcLight Gala, where we are celebrating a safer Portland. But I want to tell you a story. A story about clean docks and dirty water." A few heads turned. Drews, on the main stage, paused. "I want to tell you about a man who keeps the docks clean," Sloane said, her voice gaining strength, echoing Cassian's words. "A man who believes in rules. And I want to tell you about the filters, the men in charge who prefer the water dirty, because it gives them power." Security was moving. 2 men in black suits were heading for her, their expressions grim. "I want to tell you about an organization," Sloane continued, her eyes fixed on Kellen Drews, "that wears a badge, but answers to no one. An organization called Orion." "Shut her down," Drews hissed into his collar. The 2 guards grabbed her arms. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." And the world went black. May, patched into the museum's grid from a van 2 blocks away, cut the power. The room plunged into absolute, terrified darkness. Screams erupted. For 12 seconds, the city's elite were blind. Sloane, who had been expecting it, did not scream. She stood still. Then, the main projector screens at the front of the hall, which had been displaying Drews's face, flared to life. The power was not back, but the screens were, fed by May's battery backup. The pier, the fog, the sodium lights. The gala guests watched, frozen, as the grainy, chaotic footage Sloane had captured filled the room. They saw Valdez. They saw the Orion team. They heard the first gunshot. They saw Cassian, a blurred shadow, disabling 2 men. They saw the UV-lit face of Valdez's man and the glowing hand of Mr. Thorne. And finally, they saw the team leader, the man in the mirrored mask, raise his shield, the footage zoomed in, stabilizing, the audio enhanced. Kellen Drew's face, clear as day, speaking into his radio. "He is contained. Let Valdez go. We clean this up." The lights in the hall snapped back on, blindingly bright. The room was in chaos. People were shouting, running for the exits. And standing on the glass-walled terrace, framed against the rainy night sky, was Cassian Vale. He was not in a suit. He was in the same black Henley and worn jeans from the warehouse. He was unarmed. His hands were in front of him, and in one of them, he held a pair of simple, silver handcuffs dangling from one finger. He was smiling, the cold, dangerous smile of a man who had already won. He looked only at Sloane. Kellen Drew saw his empire a single, 10-second clip. His face, which had been a mask of civic pride, was now a rictus of pure panic. He looked at the exits, at the stampeding guests, and then he looked at Sloane, the source of it all. He lunged, his arm wrapping around her neck, pulling her backward, his body shielding his. "Nobody move," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Nobody moves or I snap her neck. Shut off those screens, shut them off." The room froze. The screens were still playing the damning loop. Cassian stepped through the open terrace door, into the hall. He did not run. He walked, his footsteps silent on the marble. He stopped 10 feet from Drew's, his smile gone, his eyes pure ice. "You picked the wrong guy to threaten," Cassian said, his voice a calm, lethal rumble in the screaming silence. Sloane, held tight in Drew's chokehold, her lungs burning, met Cassian's gaze. This was it, the final play, slowly, so Drew's could not see. She raised her left hand near her face. She flexed her index and middle fingers. Twice. The signal. Cassian nodded. Almost imperceptibly, the plan was in motion. The signal was given. Kellen Drew's arm was a vise of iron around Sloane's throat, her feet scraping the marble floor as he dragged her backward. "I said shut it down," he screamed, his face a mask of primal terror. A sudden, loud hiss erupted from the ceiling. It was not an alarm. It was the museum's fire suppression system. But it was not water. A thick, white, oily mist began to spray from a dozen vents, designed to suffocate flames and protect the priceless glass art. The grand hall vanished. Within seconds, the room was a chaotic, swirling vortex of white fog. Guests were screaming, coughing. Drew's, blinded, tightened his grip, pulling Sloane closer. "Where is he?" Drew's yelled into the void. This was her moment. This was the move Cassian had shown her on the houseboat, his hands guiding hers, his voice low. He will grab high to crush the throat. He had said, "Use your chin. Drop your weight, twist against the thumb." Sloane jammed her chin down hard, creating a small pocket of air. Then she dropped her entire body weight, a dead, sudden fall. Drew's, caught off balance, stumbled. She did not try to pull his arm off. She twisted her body hard to the left, against the weak point of his thumb. His grip, slick with the mist, broke. Sloane dropped to the floor, scrambling away into the fog. Cassian was already moving. He materialized from the white vapor, a wraith in the chaos. He did not go for Drew's. He went for the glass-paneled railing Drew's was scrambling toward. As Drew's reached for the railing to orient himself, Cassian's hand shot out. There was no sound of a punch, no gunshot, only the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs he had taken from the guard. Cassian had locked Drew's, by the wrist, to the immovable glass banister. He did not spill blood. He did not cause harm. He severed the man's power, leaving him chained, literally, to his own monument of corruption. The mist began to recede, the ventilation system sucking it out as fast as it had been deployed. Sloane was on her feet, the clutch in her hand. "Nobody leave," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. She flicked the switch on her UV light. The remaining guests, huddled and terrified, watched. She aimed the purple beam at Mr. Thorne, the generous patriot. who was trying to slip toward a service exit, the back of his hand, where he had touched the container at the pier, lit up with a sickening, brilliant green glow. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Phones were instantly raised, filming. "He was there," Sloane shouted. "He was at the pier." Then she turned the beam onto Kellen Drews, who was rattling his handcuffs against the railing, his face purple with rage. The light hit the lapel of his expensive suit, where he had braced himself against the container door. It, too, glowed with the same damning chemical signature. "And so was he," Sloane yelled. Her phone, still propped on the podium, was streaming it all live. The main glass doors of the museum burst open, and this time, it was not security. Men and women in dark blue vests marked Metro Integrity Task Force flooded the room. They were not confused. They moved with purpose. Kellen Drews, their team leader, a grim-faced woman, announced, "You are under arrest for abuse of public authority, criminal conspiracy, and racketeering." She was holding a tablet, which was playing Sloane's live feed. Sloane had sent her the complete data package, including the pier footage, 30 minutes before she walked into the gala. "You have no idea who I am," Drews shrieked as they unlocked his cuff from the rail and secured his hands behind his back. "We do," the officer replied. "Thanks to Miss Whitaker, the whole city does." Outside, in the parking garage, Valdez and his 2 remaining men, hearing the sirens, made a desperate run for their SUV. They rounded the corner, only to find their exit blocked by a heavy-duty pickup truck. Jack Sotero, his face a mask of cold redemption, sat at the wheel. Valdez spun, pulling his gun, ready for a shootout, but as he turned toward the only other exit, he was met by a wall of flashing red and blue lights. The MIT team had sealed the garage. Jax had not engaged them. He had simply herded them, a sheepdog guiding the wolves into a legal cage. The street fight was over, replaced by the simple, clean click of handcuffs. The gala hall was a sea of flashing lights. The mist had settled, leaving a damp chill in the air, the scent of a storm that had finally broken. Cassian stood in the middle of the marble floor, his black shirt soaked. He had not moved. Sloane walked toward him, ignoring the officers, the staring guests, the flashing cameras. She stopped just in front of him. He looked down at her, the chaos of the room reflected in his gray eyes. "I keep the docks," he said, his voice a low rumble, meant only for her. Sloane raised her hand, resting it on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. "You keep the truth." He covered her hand with his own, his grip warm and sure. "We keep each other." Later, the storm outside had truly passed. On the Crescent 13, the only sound was the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the Willamette against the hull. The single anchor light swung in the breeze, casting a slow, golden dance of shadows across the small cabin. They were not talking about Drews or Valdez or the truth. They were tangled on the narrow bunk, a quiet knot of shared breath and undeniable gravity. This was not the desperate, fiery kiss of before. This was the aftermath. This was the calm. His hands were gentle, tracing the line of her jaw as if he were memorizing her in a new language. Sloane's arms were looped around his neck, her fingers threaded in his hair, holding him to her. It was a long, slow kiss that spoke of safety, of promises kept. His lips were warm, a stark contrast to the cold he had lived in. "You are here," he murmured, his voice rough, his forehead resting against hers. "You are safe." "I am with you," she whispered back, the words a vow. His mouth found hers again, a claiming that was both gentle and absolute. It was the feeling of a shared pulse, of skin on skin, of a world narrowed down to this single, floating point of warmth. The cabin curtains were drawn, the world outside fading away, leaving them to the sound of the water and the simple, profound truth of being, finally, in the right place. The next day, Sloane's podcast, The Dock Keeper, was the #1 news item in the country. It was a masterpiece of evidence. Orion Compliance Unit was suspended, its operations frozen, its leadership facing a massive federal investigation. At Kestrel Yard, the Marrow Street outfit went back to work, the clean docks rule enforced, but this time with the city's grudging respect. Weeks later, sunset, the Hawthorne Bridge was a parking lot. Sloane was not in her car. She was on the back of the Triumph Street Twin, her arms wrapped tightly around Cashin's waist, her cheek resting against the familiar, solid plane of his leather-clad back. The light turned green, just as he had before. Cassian sat, letting the cars in front of them pull away. He looked in the side mirror, his gray eyes finding hers. A slow smile touched his lips, the one that made the scar on his cheek crinkle. "Are you planning on flirting with me again, Whitaker?" he asked, his voice a rumble she felt through her entire body. Sloane laughed, the sound light and free in the cool evening air. She squeezed him tighter. "Too late for that." "Right," he said. He twisted the throttle, and the bike surged forward, merging into the flow. "You already picked the right guy." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.